That's right, guys. We got some new intro, countdown music. Welcome back to the Pleb Underground. I am your host, Coin Icarus. And joining me today, I've got the two wonderful fellow Bitcoiners from VORA. That's right. If you haven't heard about that yet, they're going to explain everything about it. Who am I talking about? I've got Erik, Cason, and Jesse Posner joining me. Guys, welcome to the Pleb Underground. Thank you so much.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Very cool. All right, guys. I was taking a look through your custody solution. I'm very excited about it, and obviously, you guys are here to tell us all about it. We're going to ask you all kinds of questions. Hopefully, we got some people in the chat that are going to start to pile in and also start to ask some questions. But before we do, guys, you know the drill, right? We've got to show some love to the Pleb Underground sponsor. So we're going to do that, and we're going to be right back to dive into this awesome conversation with Erik and Jesse. Here we go. Head on over to Archimedes Emporium. They make absolutely beautiful Bitcoin branded products. They just dropped their first one. It is the solid aluminum Bitcoin clock. I had to get my hands on it so that I could show it to you guys. Take a look. Really, really nice piece. Beautiful craftsmanship. Head on over to archamp.co. The link is going to be in the show notes. That is Archimedes Emporium. Head on over there. That's right. Okay. Archimedes Emporium. Very, very nice, high quality stuff. They're going to be making more than just a clock. The clock is just the entry. But anyways, guys, doesn't matter. Now we are talking about the main topic here is VORA. But before we dive into VORA, I would like each of you. I guess we'll start with Jesse, or I mean, you guys can pick who starts. But just to give a little bit about yourself for if someone doesn't possibly know you, one of the plebs that's watching. I highly doubt it, but you know, they probably know both of you.
It's all good. Yeah, I mean, I used to be a lawyer by training, and around 2013, got interested in Bitcoin. Got interested in thinking about the law from a code perspective, from an engineering perspective. Learning about Bitcoin sent me on a path of learning about the cypherpunk idea that in the digital age, we need to secure human rights, not just through law, but also through code, through math. So that eventually led me to learn how to code, learn cryptography, and joined Coinbase in 2016, where my very first day, my very first meeting was an onboarding session with Erik. And we quickly did a deep dive into philosophy and our mutual passion for Bitcoin, and just kind of instantly became friends. And at Coinbase, I was working on cold storage, key management, key generation ceremonies, multi-party computation, and learned a ton about cryptography and security, and so was there for about 4.5 years, and then got a grant through Brink to do a project called Frost, which is a cryptography project. So I had a open source grant working on that for about 1.5 years, and then joined the BitKey team to work on self-custody, and was doing that for almost 3 years. And then started to get this vision of a radically different approach to self-custody, a different way of thinking about self-custody, very much inspired by Erik's work, and decided, you know, hey, we should embark on this adventure together and reinvent self-custody and secure the self-sovereign future, and that's why we founded VORA.
It seems very serendipitous that you guys met, and because I know you guys a little bit each individually. I find this is just, to me, it's a match made in heaven. Not trying to sound weird, just saying. Whether or not you believe in heaven, also I don't want to impose anything. Erik, let's talk to me, man. Give a little bit about your background. I'd be surprised if nobody knew who you were.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very serendipitous meeting because, like, those first years in Bitcoin can be terribly lonely and isolating, because you can be like, I found this thing, I think it can change everything, I want to talk to everyone about it, and everyone's like, you're crazy, get away from me, I have mace, I'll call the police. So, you know, when you kind of lose it, it can be really difficult on that lonely journey at first. And even though I joined Coinbase in 2013 with like a few other crazy people, I was still kind of like the craziest of the crazies. And it was really only when I had met Jesse that I was like, oh, like this brand of crazy exists in other people. And with that, we were able to carry forward with a really wonderful development of a friendship. And so after I left Coinbase in 2017, after the block size wars, I really focused on my philosophy and really writing more essays and really cultivating my curiosity around like, what is this relationship between Bitcoin and being and existence, and like how is it possible that this piece of technology could seem to have such profound implications for what the future could mean. And then after that, I shortly did about a year-long stint at Unchained, kind of helping them scale up. And at this point, I was like, you know, I seem to have a whole series and collections of essays. And that's when I believe Mark Goodwin approached me about publishing it into a book. And so I compiled those, published it in my book. And then I've been lecturing about that for the last few years. And then I had a trip to El Salvador. I invited Jesse to come along. And from that, we sat down and spent several days together just kind of going over this problem of self-custody and like, is there truly a solution that can resolve what we've now been calling the honey badger's dilemma? Is that, do you really need to choose between either a 6102 attack possibility or the possibility of a wrench attack? And is there a way to sort of mitigate between the two solutions? And we think that we've found a really excellent solution, while also providing sort of the highest level of not only security, but we really want to have ease of use and really start going after this full vertical that like sort of is all Bitcoin products, yet nobody's actually created something to funnel all of those products into a full plug and play, easy to use vertical.
Yeah, before we dive into it, I got to ask you guys, because I didn't realize that you both worked at Coinbase. Was it evil back then? I just, because, and again, I know I'm framing it terribly, right? Because there's no like real evil and good. There's a bunch of individual incentives and, you know, all of that stuff. But what was the feeling back then? What was the environment at Coinbase at Coinbase that around that time?
No apologies needed. So I think early on it was, everyone was just really kind of committed to this mission of like, let's build this Bitcoin wallet. Let's get Bitcoin in the hands of as many people. There was a lot of misfits and other individuals, because like it wasn't some big high powered corporation yet. It was just like a scrappy startup. So it was more of like, hey, if you're like insane enough to want to work at a Bitcoin startup, like come on over and join us. And it had that vibe, I think, for several years. And then I think right after Jesse joined, like the ICO boom started to happen. And that's when a lot of sort of I would say that's sort of where the inflection point started, because it started to become very clear that a lot of individuals were enamored with not only Ethereum, but the idea of ICOs. And this was all still a really new idea. So the full concept of shitcoining hadn't really developed itself yet. And I think as that carried on forward, it started to become pretty clear that these ICOs weren't some major revolution within cryptography and changing sort of the concourse of what human history offers, but that it was just really the banal graft of being able to pump and dump. And I think after enough of those happened, it became pretty clear that it wasn't, that the mission had started to diverge. And then for me, that continually built up until the block size wars. And with Coinbase joining the New York agreement, I had some opinions about that. Not to mention on the support side, like we're already really lacking the support internally from the company. So I knew as soon as that there was a sincere hard fork that it would be a nightmare on the support side, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So that's when I stepped away. And you know, I think a lot of it is that the siren's call of shitcoining became so loud and apparent that the total mission was forgotten. You know, now we advanced to today that like there was literally a military parade celebrating the war machine, and like Coinbase sponsored it, and it's just like it was a real kind of yeah, it was a little jarring to see that and to not really understand how or why such a decision would be made and how the ethos could be so fully disconnected from itself.
I will say though that, you know, of all the custodians when it comes to security, I think Coinbase is far and away, you know, a step above in terms of having a very strong security culture at the company. You know, where having incredible security experts, cryptographers, and, you know, a lot of times at companies, security, the security team kind of struggles to gain influence and power because the security team is always slowing things down.
That's right.
Well, you know, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this, or maybe we have to add friction. And at Coinbase, security is top dog, and the number one, you know, motto we had at Coinbase was, you know, we cannot be hacked under any circumstances. That's the number one thing. And I learned incredible security practices from the people that I worked with, working with Faraday tents, having, you know, companies come and shred computers in front of us that we had generated keys on to make sure no information leaks from those machines. So definitely, you know, there's issues with the ICOs, the tokens. I mean, I think in recent years, Coinbase seems to be kind of coming back to a little bit more of a Bitcoin focus. But definitely one thing that's been constant is an incredible emphasis on security and having that track record of never having any kind of, you know, anywhere close to having like the cold storage or hot wallet, you know, get breached, and the incredible practices that go into that. So of course, you know, we're all about self-custody, but if you have to interact with a custodian or if you need to exchange fiat for Bitcoin, I would, you know, trust the Coinbase security above, you know, any of their competitors.
Yeah, I think with Coinbase, it's kind of interesting, right? Because I think Bitcoiners have, at least I'm going to give like just a very high level, you know, kind of like a high level take about this is Bitcoiners didn't like that they hired Hack Team like 6 years ago or whatever it is. Like that was like a big freaking red flag, right? And then it was like the constant seemingly gaslighting, which I don't think that Brian Armstrong was necessarily doing this on purpose, but you know, just the constant mention of crypto over and over again, and never like never acknowledging Bitcoin. And to your point, Jesse, all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden, it seems as though the language has changed, right? He's saying crypto a little bit less. He's saying Bitcoin a little bit more. It's, you know, so I appreciate that, right? Like obviously we appreciate that, but you know, it's kind of like it's tough for the people who do have some context of the history, like you guys, you know, and myself as well, that you know some of the people that they've hired, you know some of the ends that they've gone to. And to Eric's point, right? I mean, sponsoring a military parade, like, look, I understand the idea of being a patriot, you know, and all of that good stuff. I get that, but it's like if you're supposed to be representing, let's say, this industry, and I get it, you know, like there's a whole lot of suits in there, it's a public company, but like that's a message you're sending out, right? That you support state violence, and that to me is a bit of a slippery slope.
I mean, there was always an interesting cultural tension at Coinbase because on the one hand, you had these, especially in the early days, like crazy anarchists like Erik and I and a bunch of other people too. And then there was this strategy taken from the beginning that Coinbase wanted to be the white knight in the industry. And in order to not get shut down and to be able to kind of keep the fiat bridge open into crypto, that you know, they decided to make a very strong partnership with law enforcement, with the regulators, And, and some of that led to some really bad stuff getting shut down, child porn or some really grisly criminal activity. They had these strong relationships with law enforcement and would pass on information and, go after bad activity. And a lot of people on the compliance team are very proud of, that work. But definitely there's a tension there and hacking team was a huge black eye. And the whole time I was there, we would have debates internally and really have tough conversations and things, oftentimes that I did not agree with in terms of how much are we going to get involved with these law enforcement investigations, get involved in the surveillance or chain analysis aspect of, of crypto, and versus how much are we going to protect the privacy of, the customers. And so, there, compared to a self-custody company where we don't really have to get the blessing of regulators and we don't have KYC AML obligations, we can be 100% focused on customer privacy and not have that kind of conflict of interest or tension. But for a company like Coinbase of their size and their interaction, not only with regulators, but with the banks, because another threat for Coinbase is even if the regulators don't shut them down, the banks can shut down the rails at any moment. And there was some dicey moments in the history of Coinbase where they lost their banking partners overnight and had to scramble to find new banking partners. So they're in a tough spot. I don't think they've always gotten it right, but I do think it's important to appreciate the context that kind of business has to exist within. And it's a very tough problem.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think you outlined it very well right there, like the actual complexity and the type of relationships, right, that essentially has to be formed. To your point, I've talked about this several times on a bit of a different topic about Tether, right? Like, love Tether or hate them, the reality is that they, in terms of a stable coin issuer, are playing this game the best, right? They were buying US treasuries before anybody else, right? They were getting regulators involved before anybody else, right? Cantor Fitzgerald was looking at their numbers. Now, whether or not you trust all of this stuff is a totally different story. But the point is that in terms of perception and a narrative, right? Like, if you are a representative of the state and you're looking at this business, you're saying, hey, these guys, they want to play ball, and
I mean, lesser of evils, comparisons is always very dicey, we're like, hey, this is the least bad that a stable issue, stable coin issuer can be, or, it's not meeting our ethical ideals. But, is it still a net positive to the industry to have a fiat exchange that can process tens and hundreds of billions of dollars, or have a stable coin issuer? Because a lot of the strategy of Bitcoin is this kind of Trojan horse dynamic where we don't come head on with these conflicts, where we just go, we're not going to get into a shooting war with the state, because that's a no-win suicide mission. We need these sly roundabout techniques or cryptographic techniques where things are slowly put into place over time under the surface, where they can't easily be seen and can't easily be disrupted, where people are orange pilled, where they don't come into Bitcoin with a political interest. They come in maybe with a greedy interest. They want to make money. But then in the process of owning Bitcoin, learning about Bitcoin, they change how they think, how they relate to things, because that orange pill starts to move through their metabolism and change their consciousness. So it's a very murky kind of business of, political struggle, change, revolution, and it's not always as direct or obvious or clean cut as we would want it to be. But I think, we have to come at it from all these different directions. And I think many of us got our first Bitcoin from Coinbase. And, it's like, at least, I mean, I'm also ended up on this list that ended up, leaking and is in the hands of organized crime. So, it's definitely not a perfect situation, but there's a lot of nuance that I think is important to take into account. And at the same time, we absolutely should hold these companies accountable. We should have high ethical and moral standards. That's a huge part of what we're doing at VORA, is that we're able to have an uncompromising vision and uncompromising culture, because we're aligning all the incentives from the very beginning. So we don't have to make all these messy decisions. We're aligning the incentives between the customer, the employees. For example, we're a self-custody company, and every employee at the company, part of their future compensation will be time-locked Bitcoin that is stored in our self-custody system in their own home. So if the self-custody system is not safe for the customer, it's not safe for the employee. So if there's some bug, if there's some privacy issue, they're going to be really incentivized and motivated to fix it or to prevent that from happening, because their own home safety and their own compensation is on the line. The whole skin in the game principle. And we're also able to go to our investors and say to them up front, we are a pure Bitcoin company. We're a hyper Bitcoinization company. We will never shitcoin. We will never stablecoin. That is baked into, if you're investing in this company, you must be on board for that. So these are all built on lessons that we've learned from being at Coinbase, from seeing what happened to other people in the industry, other engineers, other amazing, motivated, creative Bitcoiners that go to work for a Bitcoin company or what they think is a Bitcoin company. And then somewhere along the way, they learn, hey, this is actually a fiat company masquerading as a Bitcoin company. And all these values that we have and the cypherpunk ethos and everything else is getting watered down, is getting deprioritized. So culture is a huge part of what we're doing. We talk about how, VORA is first and foremost a philosophical company. It has a basis in Erik's philosophy. It has a basis in the history of political philosophy and a core vision that's deeper than just making money or the typical kind of tech startups, but something that's grounded deeply into Bitcoin, deeply into the cypherpunk ethos. And that is going to be a huge differentiator for us.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna dive into VORA momentarily. I had two more questions for you guys first, but I think you actually kind of answered the actually. All right, so here we go. The first one was the I think it was Erik that made the comment about 6102 or wrench attack, right? And this was in relation to VORA. And I just want to point out, as you guys know, Jameson Lopp covers essentially like almost every single wrench attack that happens anywhere in the world, as long as it ends up in some news feed. It's kind of interesting that they seem to be happening a lot in France, right? Sorry?
That's one of the motivations for why we're starting VORA now, is it's very clear that there's a bell curve upward. And furthermore, because of the relationship that Bitcoiners have had to rely on trying to take on security totally on their own, organized crime sees Bitcoiners as being a soft target, and they will come after them. And that's a very real problem that needs to be addressed in a meaningful way. And it's scary, and I particularly feel extra sorry for our European counterparts, because they've been deprived of the ability to own firearms and to use lethal force against individuals coming to bring violence against them. And like, that's really scary. And frankly, I also think it goes to show the very real importance of the American value system. The fact that like we can own firearms that offer us the ability to use lethal force against other people. And I always think it's really interesting when I hear the Second Amendment debates about people wanting to strip people of their ability to own firearms. And you go, well, look at these sort of crimes that are happening in Europe, where people are being abducted and then violently tortured because they don't have the ability to respond with lethal force.
it's kind of scary that you're not allowed to protect yourself. And it's this weird kind of brainwashing to make you think that somehow you not being allowed to protect yourself is part of this plan for the greater good. Like in what world? So anyways, yeah, no, we're not going to go too far into those weeds because obviously I want to stick to the VORA stuff. But I do want to ask you guys this question first before we dive into everything VORA. I want to know from both of you this whole Bitcoin Core versus NOTS garbage. Is this reminiscent to either of you guys of the Bitcoin Cash fork? I personally feel it's like equally as noisy, but I just don't. I think it's a giant nothing burger. I've been saying that from the beginning, and obviously, not this is very polarizing. So, what are your guys' thoughts?
I mean, like I find the whole thing a bit embarrassing, frankly, because like I feel like we're debating about like whether or not to have trash cans on the street, and it's like meanwhile there's like a large modification of something like opt CTV or like there's much bigger things to be debated and much more upset about. And furthermore, every time that the NOTS argument gets drilled down into, like I always find it's ideologically it has a great ideological argument, but the technical substance isn't there. And the way I keep explaining it to is like, look, because of the fundamental structure of how Bitcoin works, like data goes into it. And like some of that data is garbage. And so like there's a couple options. Like we can throw the garbage on the street and like eventually there's garbage everywhere and there's nothing to be done about it. And that's like what the UTXO set is. And that's people dumping garbage into that. Or we can make trash cans and like put the garbage in the trash can. It sucks that there's still garbage, but at least it's in the trash can. And like, that's the op return. And then there's people who are like, well, no one should ever litter. And like, there shouldn't be trash cans because it incentivizes littering. So like, don't put trash cans anywhere. And I also think that like, it's like, great. Like if you guys have a different solution than trash cans, like we'd love to hear it. And then there's crickets. And they're like, but there shouldn't be trash cans. And it's, I'm just at the point, it's like, you know what, you guys go have the NOTS fork. Like I'll take the Bitcoin from you. You can have NOTS Bitcoin and we'll see what the markets decide about it. And that's sort of where I'm at. And I'd really just like to kind of move on because the other one is I'd really appreciate if people could ask themselves to technically challenge themselves a bit more to be like, is this actually an ideological debate or is there a deep technical aspect to this that maybe can't be solved directly?
Yeah, and I do think in a lot of ways it is reminiscent of the fork wars, especially in the kind of ad hominem and conspiracy theories about Bitcoin Core. Yes. I mean, that was the same thing that happened, in the Bitcoin Cash days where, because it's one thing, like you have a technical debate and there's things reasonable people can disagree about. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you secretly like work for the bankers and you're trying to destroy Bitcoin. Like you can just have a disagreement, but it takes on this tenor of, oh, Bitcoin Core is this secretive, like evil organization that's purposefully like trying to destroy Bitcoin. And I think that's a very unhealthy part of the debate. And I know many of these Bitcoin Core developers, including people who are legends, Gregory Maxwell, Peter Woola, Matt Coralla, like all of these people who have been working in Bitcoin open source for over a decade, have contributed so many of the most brilliant, incredible ideas, who understand it at a deeper technical level than anyone. And it doesn't mean they're automatically right and we should just not question them and not listen to them. But I think these are high integrity people that genuinely care about what is best for Bitcoin. And we should have the debate and the conversation on that basis. It doesn't mean we can't disagree, but let's not throw these unfounded accusations at each other that there's ulterior motives when all we see in terms of evidence is somebody devoting their life to this system. And I think another really important thing to keep in mind with these dynamics is Bitcoin Core can't force anybody to do anything. That's the beauty of Bitcoin. There's no coercion. There's no, you have to do this. If you don't like a commit, if you don't like part of the code, you can change it. You can revert that commit. You can rewrite the code. So these are people who are publishing code, giving it away for free, and they're entitled to decide for themselves what they think that best code is. And as a node runner, you're entitled to decide if you want to run that code, or if you want to run a different implementation, or if you want to modify that code. And that, you know, the core developers, they're not on our payroll. We don't get to boss them around and tell them, this is how you should think, this is what you should do. You know, they are engaged in a public project. They do have a duty to explain what they're doing and, you know, engage with the community, but we want them to make the decisions that they believe is right for Bitcoin. Because the alternative is every single thing in Bitcoin could be easily stopped in terms of Bitcoin development by creating fake conflict. Like if it was a democracy where like we did a Twitter vote and decided like what code to run, then you could easily just destroy the whole thing by creating like a bunch of fake opposition. And so when there's a consensus among the Bitcoin Core developers, which there is about the op return issue, the fact that there's controversy in social media should not be something that blocks their decisions, their technical decisions, because then every technical decision that they make can be easily blocked. So they have a consensus. They believe this is what's right for Bitcoin. And a big part of that is the risk of miner centralization, that even if you completely hate inscriptions and you completely hate shitcoins, and you completely hate all of this stuff, the issue is if you filter out the transactions at the relay level, the people who want to get this stuff in will just go directly to the miners. And what happens when they go directly to the miners is they create private mempools that centralize mining, that give an advantage to the large miners over the small miners. The data still gets in the chain. The NOSTR implementation is still downloading those blocks, validating them, and relaying them, even though they include the transactions that they filtered. So it doesn't actually end up, and the amount of money people are making on inscriptions outweighs any incremental cost that they're incurring from having to go directly to miners. So, you know, like Erik was saying, like if you really want to fight this battle, then it should happen at the consensus level, not at the relay level. The relay level should mirror consensus. If relay departs from consensus, that's bad for the overall health of the network. If NOTS really is like willing to put their money where their mouth is, they should reject not just the transactions they don't like, but the blocks they don't like. They should create a fork and a split and take it to the consensus level, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's what happened with the block size wars, is ultimately you have to fork off and you have to take it to the marketplace and have your fork compete again with your vision and what you think is right. Otherwise, you're kind of just LARPing.
Yeah. I think I think you hit the nail on the head. This is definitely part of the that's been part of my reasoning behind this as well. And I also, to both of your points, right? I do find it interesting that immediately it becomes this is what got me to draw the line in the sand. I saw a lot of appeals to emotion. And for me, like it's just once you start doing the appeal to emotion, we start going down that road of how does this feel when I think about it? And now you've just, like, to me, like we're just lost in the woods. But look, I appreciate your guys' take on this. Obviously, you know, we're gonna see what actually ends up happening, because obviously, you know, when people seem to talk about forking, nobody really wants to fork. I just want you to do what I say. right?
Right.
Like I don't want to have this other thing. I just need you to do what I say on this thing that we both like. So it's yeah, I think I think this waste of time is unfortunately going to continue on. But we are going to switch gears to the reason why we're here. And we are going to talk finally, we are going to talk about VORA. So I am very excited that you guys have joined forces to make security and privacy great again. I can tell you that definitely there's only a few things that keeps me up at night, and one of them is how to secure your keys and how to avoid wrench attacks. Obviously, I'm in a state where I can have guns and all that good stuff, but that doesn't stop the little the little mouse in the back of the head. So that being said, let's start off with, what does VORA mean? Why did you choose this name? Let's start with that.
We have a very good reason, which is VORA comes from the Latin name Mellivora capensis, which is the Latin name for the honey badger. So that's why you see that in the VORA logo. We've got the V and the honey badger, because we are channeling the spirit, the indomitable will, the toughness, the tenacity of the honey badger. Bitcoin is the honey badger of money, and VORA is the honey badger of self-custody. So yeah, you can see the honey badger there. And we think there's no more powerful symbol that we can be using to embody the spirit of what self-custody needs to be to actually deliver on the promise of self-sovereignty.
I appreciate you explaining that. I definitely was not expecting the honey badger analogy, although I should have, right, considering we're in Bitcoin. But I got to say that Google definitely fails, and so does even Grok on this. Because I got to be honest with you, the only thing it came up with was like, the vor, right? Like eating and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think this. And then I started thinking, I'm like, okay, so maybe it's eating the money. Anyways. All right. So that's good stuff. All right. I appreciate that. And I like that too. I definitely, there was definitely no mention of the Latin stuff. Okay. So I noticed that your guys' solution is in 4 parts. And I was looking through and I was trying to figure out, so can you explain essentially these 4 parts?
Yeah. So, we actually searched through, so there's 8 total authentication factors is how we put it. So there's the VORA vault, which is the most secure hardware, the most secure computer in the world. It has, it's going to be in the form of a server rack. And the reason we want a server rack is we want it to have access to wall power, because that's part of our wrench detection monitoring, which we'll get into. And we want it to be inconspicuous. So, a server cabinet or server rack is just a generic piece of IT equipment. And we don't want a guest in the home knowing, like, hey, you got a bunch of Bitcoin. So we want something that looks generic, at least until you open up the cabinet, which has a physical lock. And we want something that is much more robust than what people are used to with their hardware wallets, which is these little dinky pieces of plastic. You wouldn't buy $100 safe off of Amazon and put $1 million in it.
We're doing that right now.
That's what we're doing, right? So we need something way more robust. So we have a full high-end server using a Raptor Blackbird motherboard, which is a fully open source motherboard with a Power 9 chip that has a open source microcode. That's the Bitcoin node. And that's the other thing that's missing from self-custody is you have no privacy as a self-custody user if you are not running your own node, because you are giving all your transaction data away to some third-party Electrum server or other sort of blockchain provider, that when you query with your wallet, your balance or your transactions, or you broadcast a transaction, you're telling them how much Bitcoin you have, what your transactions are.
Mm-hmm.
And you also need a full node to run things like silent payments. There's all kinds of Bitcoin technologies that just don't work very well if you don't have your full node. So we also want to take this out of the kind of hobbyist, do-it-yourself experience where you're buying all these disparate products like a Start9 or a wallet and you're wiring them all together. We want a fully integrated, plug-and-play, comprehensive end-to-end solution. So the VORA Vault, you've got your node in the box. And then air-gapped, you have a key signing module. And that uses an FPGA and also the new Tropic Square chip. So we're going to defend against supply chain attacks. So there's a lot going on with this VORA Vault. We have environmental sensors for tamper detection that will cut power. And we have what we call indicators of wrench, IOWs, which are various signals where our monitoring service has some indicator that maybe you're getting wrench attacked. And if we think that might happen or be happening, including we notice the node goes offline, or we see that the wrong PIN is entered, or we see one of the pre-signed transaction gets broadcast. And by the way, for all of these indicators, we do it in a privacy preserving way. So we don't actually know how much Bitcoin you have or what your transactions are. But if this happens, our monitoring team gives a phone call, checks for a verbal password. If we think you're in trouble, we route encrypted location data that we can't see to either law enforcement or private security or both, depending on your preference. So we can respond, intervene in that wrench attack. We can establish credible deterrence. So that's like the VORA Vault piece. And there's a lot more we could go into there, but that's just sort of a high level summary. And then we also have, or go ahead.
Sorry, I just have a question for you about the VORA Vault. Just for people to understand. So the VORA Vault is a physical piece of hardware that people would purchase, correct?
Yeah, it's a physical piece of hardware. It's a server rack. It's a full high-end server. There's an offline key generation, key signing system. There's two one-way diodes that can communicate over the air gap with a physical switch. That's the VORA Vault.
Okay. It's very, very interesting. I like that. And by the way, I like the fact that you were talking about sensors, because my background is in access control, and so I used to program essentially event-driven software, right? That had to do with either weight sensors, gas sensors, just door latch relays, things like that, right? Contacts, and you would have some type of an event that would then go and call the police or something like that, or call the campus security. And yeah, I think you guys are going. I think you're going in the right direction with this. Okay, let's move on to the next component. Let's take a look at this. The mobile app. So I do like this. I have to admit that I find one of the before you start explaining this, I find that one of the main user experience aspects that gets overlooked is essentially how easy it is to use something, and how comfortable you can feel using something as soon as possible. So what I'm saying is that for whatever reason, that there's a lot of products where the mobile app, even in this particular climate at this time, seems to be like an afterthought. It's like, let's get our main platform out the door, and then we'll take a look at a mobile app. But I think that's a huge fail, and I think that you guys are getting this right, where you're coming out with this piece immediately. So if you can just talk to me about the mobile app.
Yeah. So we have a mobile app. And by the way, the mobile app will have a hot wallet that is separate from the cold wallet. The mobile app does not have sufficient key material to move your cold funds. Otherwise, it wouldn't be cold. To truly be cold, the Bitcoin has to be secured by keys that have never touched a networked component. That's where we have that offline. But you do want to be able to have some walking around money, not sufficient to have like a serious wrench threat, but you're at a Bitcoin conference, you want to pay for coffee with Lightning or whatever. That's one of the things that the mobile app will do. The other thing is the mobile app can trigger our indicators of wrench. It can trigger that kind of physical security response. It can trigger recovery flows with pre-signed transactions that get broadcast. And these pre-signed transactions, they have time locks on them. And they can't, if they are being broadcast by an attacker, you have time to actually cancel the pre-signed transaction and preventing it from settling. Or if somebody gets your VORA vault and is possession of it, we have all kinds of tamper resistance and tamper detection, but you can use a pre-signed transaction to move the Bitcoin to a different layer. And that layer, you need to use the recovery kits, you need a PIN, you need other factors. The mobile app alone, can't move funds. The mobile app also gives us, and by the way, you can use an Android phone that is dedicated just for your VORA system. If you want the most paranoid setup, or you have, a fully kind of locked down Android phone, or you can use like the convenience of the phone that you use every day, and customers can make that decision for themselves. We do not trust the mobile app for security critical operations. We know mobile apps can be targets for malware. We can't trust the screen for transaction verification because of malware. So it is one piece of the puzzle, but not the only piece. And it can provide one factor. Everything we do, there's multi-factor authentication. It can provide one of the factors for authentication through the biometric authentication or through the password you enter in, and using the secure enclave in the mobile phone, where you can generate an authentication key that's in the trusted execution environment in a secure enclave on the phone. And that can be a useful way to authenticate. And it also has access to a cloud backup where we can store certain data. And one very important thing about the mobile app, and this is where we get into some of the 6102 mitigations, is that at least in the United States and in some other countries as well, we have this notion of the right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment. And this principle of law actually goes back hundreds of years to the 16th century, where we had these Star Chamber trials where people were forced, in England, forced to testify against themselves. And so we've had this very sacred principle of law for a long time that is constitutionally enshrined. That's a pillar of maintaining a free society, that you cannot be forced to testify against yourself. And there is legal precedent that when you have a testimonial factor, so if you have a mobile phone with a password, you cannot be compelled to give that even under a court order. And or any kind of forced decryption scenario. And if your phone enforces, for example, 10 wrong guesses, it will wipe itself, like a lot of phones have that feature, then it can't be brute forced, and you're not going to be able to get into that phone. And in half the jurisdictions in the United States, this is still working its way through the courts, even biometrics are protected. So you can't be forced to unlock your phone with biometrics. So this gives us, for certain spending paths where the phone is one of several factors, or PIN is one of several factors, these are testimonial factors that resist 6102.
Yeah, I definitely feel like you guys really thought this through. This is very nice. Very nice. Okay. Component 3. Okay, the VORA server. So hold on a second. So there's the VORA vault, all right, which is that server, or essentially that server appliance. We've got the mobile app, and now there's the VORA server.
Yeah, this is making me think we probably need to work on the naming here, because there's the VORA Vault server, which is your self-hosted server that you're running yourself. Then there's the VORA server that we're running.
Yeah.
That we have, in AWS or our data center, we haven't, or, across multiple clouds, we haven't decided on where we're going to host it, and that will evolve over time. But that's not the server you're running as the self-custody user with your VORA Vault. That's the server we're running.
Mhm.
And that server is, again, can be one of multiple components. So for example, one way to spend will be that you use your vault, you use your PIN, and you use our server. That requires 3 factors to send the Bitcoin. Another way to spend would be you use the vault, our server, and your phone. So there's always 3 different things that you use to spend. And we have spending paths where even if our server goes away, disappears, refuses to
That's what I was
comply,
going to ask.
that you can still spend.
Mm.
But if it's up and running, it's going to be a little bit more of a convenient path that you can use. And the server will enforce time delays, because the bulk of the Bitcoin should never be able to move quickly. This provides a disincentive to attacks. It provides opportunities to respond to attacks.
Mm.
And so one of the things the server does is it enforces time delays. And when you're not using the server, we have alternative ways of enforcing these time delays using pre-signed transactions that enforce it on the blockchain level. But when you're using the server uses its own policies to enforce these time delays. But unlike all the other collaborative custodians, our server signer is privacy preserving. Because whether you look at Casa, Unchained, Bitkey, all the collaborative custodians, they also have this server signer. They have a signer that they use with the key they control. And they can use that key to find all your transactions on the blockchain. So they implicitly know with their data how much Bitcoin you have, which transactions belong to you. And that data will leak and will get into the hands of organized crime. And that makes all of their customers a target and puts them in danger. Our server is privacy preserving. It uses a technology called blind signatures and also zero knowledge proofs. So that way it doesn't see the transaction data and it can enforce the time delays in zero knowledge. And there's a bunch of fancy cryptography about, how exactly we're able to do that. But we have figured out a solution where we can have a server signer that doesn't learn any of this sensitive data.
I like this a lot. Anyways, I think that this is very cool. I don't really have too many more questions about the VORA server, though. You make an interesting point, though, about the about organized crime, and then it just made me think of people getting hired and whatnot. So in this particular case, right there's no way for this server. Let's say a malicious actor were to somehow get their hands on this server from your side, right? What in your estimation, what data could they extract that could be useful, or there is no useful data that they could extract even with access to this particular device?
The only useful data, basically there's no useful data. There's timing data where they'd say, there's an interaction with the server at this time. So maybe that would correlate, and there's IP data, but we're going to route all the IP through Tor or other kinds of IP obfuscation systems. So we don't actually know the IP of the VORA vault that we're interacting with. But, if, let's say, the government has an ability to look through the Tor network or look through the VPN layers, that could be something that they use to figure out the IP address. We think, it's pretty good solutions there. But even if they learn that IP, the data that just simply does not exist, period, end of story, is the transaction data, the balance data.
It's the most important part.
That is just, the information is not there. And so, that's how it works. And, like the comment said, it's not just organized crime that this is going to defend against. It's also government requesting this data. If the government comes to us and says, give us all the data about your customers, all we'll have is encrypted data or obfuscated IP addresses, and we can just, you know, hand them a bunch of scrambled ones and zeros and say, this is what we've got.
Yeah, that's very nice. I like that. All right, we are going to move on and take a look at the last piece of this. The final component is the recovery kit.
Yes.
All right.
So
This is always the scariest part of anybody's setup. I find for people that have gone through the act of self-sovereignty. You know that one of the first things that you should do when you set up a hardware wallet is after it's actually set up, you blank the device, you reset it to default, and you find out if your seed is really working and all that good stuff. So talk to me about your the recovery kit that you guys have. Is this a like I see here, it says, you know, the SD card backups, but is there a device or anything like that, or is this a process, or is it a combination of process plus device?
yeah, so the VORA Vault has an SD card reader writer, and it can write to these SD card backups. And these SD card backups cannot spend the Bitcoin by themselves. They are one of several factors that have to be used. So this is unlike, you know, putting your seed onto an SD card, and now if somebody gets that SD card, it's game over. This is just one piece of the puzzle. And so we want users to be able to use KYC safe deposit boxes if they don't have their own secure locations. You know, not everybody owns multiple homes or has friends and family that they're comfortable asking them to store a key with. So you can do that, or you can use a KYC safe deposit box. We need you to have at least 2 different safe deposit boxes in 2 different locations, and they're going to mirror these SD card backups. But what's great is even if those safe deposit boxes are seized, the data on it is encrypted. So you're not going to get doxed, and you need another factor that is a testimonial factor in order to be able to decrypt this data. And by the way, when it comes to PIN, we use something called an OPRF, so we can derive a strong key from a short PIN and make it brute force resistant. So you're going to need the PIN or the phone or the vault to decrypt this data. But if our server disappears or if the vault disappears, the recovery kits are going to be one of several factors that you're going to be able to use to recover. They're also used to cancel the pre-signed transactions if the pre-signed transactions get broadcast. And we can build a time delay using time lock puzzles into the recovery kit. So if a recovery kit doesn't have another factor that can slow things down, like the server or the pre-signed transaction, we can make it so that using the recovery kit requires a certain amount of time to decrypt the data. So there's a way that we can build in time delays at the encryption layer in the kit. And so when we look at all these factors, there's actually 8 different authentication factors. You have the vault, you have the server, you have the PIN, you have recovery kit 1, you have recovery kit 2, and you have the phone, and you have the cloud. So there's 8 different factors. And what we've done is we've gone from art to science in terms of figuring out the optimal self-custody solution, because we take these 8 different factors, we generate all the possible 3-factor combinations of these 8 factors. And then we apply certain constraints to these combinations, like there should never be mobile only spending paths or other kinds of rules that we built in. And what we get when we do that analysis, this is a computer aided analysis because it's too many possibilities for the human mind, is we get 98 different authentication sets that are 3 or 4 factor combinations of these 8 factors that create authentication sets. So we get 98 authentication sets that meet our requirements. Then what we need to look at is the power set of those 98 sets. The power set means what are all the ways we can combine all the collections of authentication sets. So we have 98 sets. Let's say we take the first 5. That's a collection. Let's say we take the last 5. That's a collection. All the different ways of collecting these sets, there are 2 to the 98 ways of collecting these authentication sets, which is 317 septillion combinations. So what we do is we use something called a SAT solver, where we can encode our constraints as linear equations and have the computer search through this enormous space and find all the collections that meet our requirements. So one requirement, for example, would be there should be no 2-factor catastrophic sets. So let's say you have a collection of 5 authentication sets. You should always be able to lose 2 factors, and there's still an authentication set that lets you spend. So we have all these sophisticated constraints and requirements. And out of the 317 septillion collections, we found the one golden configuration that we call collection X, which meets all the requirements. So we know with mathematical precision that we have found the optimal set of authentication sets that can defend against wrench attacks and 6102 attacks.
That's insane. Honestly, I'm like so blown away. It's like you thought about this so incredibly, so incredibly deeply. And I guess one of my questions is, so are there different tiers for the I guess as a user, right? Like, is this just like it's this one solution, or are there different tiers, I guess, of service and Vault? And I mean, obviously the mobile app is the mobile app. But yeah, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, is there kind of like the, the bronze, silver, and gold type of package, right? Like most services do.
Yeah, we're going to be starting with launching an MVP, which is going to be one single product. And then as we continue moving forward, there are going to be tiers, and including there will be probably a Vault Lite. There will also be the Vault that will then have a number of add-ons that you can have. And for example, we've been speaking to a personal home drone security company. And so if you want to go for the Platinum package, you can deploy your drone swarm that will scare off criminals when they come, because who isn't scared shitless when a drone swarm deploys and comes after you when you're doing nefarious things? And so we really see ourselves as being a total security company in the end of the day, and that we want to be your partners in helping you not only secure your Bitcoin, but secure your physical well-being. And that's the distant goal that we would like to go for, because we think that that's a really important aspect with the development of what we're starting to see with the increase of these wrench attacks. And we want to make it very clear that not only are you not going to get our customers Bitcoin, but if you do come after our customers, like, we're going to come down on you with the weight of 10,000 hammers. That's going to make sure that not only is justice served, but everyone will know that, like, if you fuck with our customers, like, you are going to prison, you will be punished, and you should really reconsider finding a different target. Like, go rob a bank. They're going to be like an easy target.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I guess my next question to you is: Are you able to share what the what the cost is for all of this? Because you got the home server. I mean, the mobile app, I imagine, like most cases, usually that part of it is free to a certain extent, or there's maybe pay features and whatnot. Are you able to share that yet, or are you guys not there yet?
Yeah, so the first iteration of the MVP products are going to be the Founders Edition. They're going to be around between $4,000 and $5,000, because this is such a premium hardware product that's open sourced, it's hand built, it's made in America, and so these are really important components for it. And then once we go into the next iteration of launch, we're going to start fabricating our own boards. This is going to help drive down the cost, and then we'll continually iterate on that. So we're really hoping that there will be a number of tiers that will be available, but this is always going to be a premium Apple-like product where people are going to be paying a little bit extra so that they can have a smooth user experience where it's plug and play, and they know that the product's going to deliver on the experience that they're paying for.
So would you say that the customer base that you are aiming for, would you say that customer base is, let's say, along the lines of, like, let's say somebody who uses River as their custodian, or, like
I would say that our client base is really going to be individuals at this point in time are whole coiners, and eventually I'd say that the whole customer base is anybody who owns more than a third of a Bitcoin, because that's a substantial amount. And it turns out that particularly when you factor in the Cargill amount, that like over time, you spending the premium in order to protect this amount of Bitcoin, and when you factor in all of the factors of possible loss, it turns out that spending that amount on a premium thing like this is really a worthwhile endeavor. And so very similar to both Apple and Tesla, like we want to go for this more premium market, that we think that there's a number of individuals out there that have a substantial amount of Bitcoin and wealth that is in Bitcoin, and they're more than happy to pay the price point in order to ensure that they have that protection and security of knowing that instead of you having this kind of constant anxiety of being like, oh God, I'm in Europe, my coins are at home, like maybe somebody's invading, you can actually just check your app and the health is green, and you go, whew, okay, I can just continue with my life. And I think that paying for that peace of mind is something that Bitcoiners everywhere are really hungry for and are willing to pay for.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the more you're explaining this, I can't help but think that businesses are we're talking about, like, home offices and stuff like that, right? That are possibly securing Bitcoin for their customers, right? Like that, to me, like I feel like I know that you guys are gearing it towards like the whole coiners and stuff like that, but I have a feeling that businesses would be very well served by this product as well, right? Because I think that one of the challenges that we do see, at least for me, I believe this is a challenge, is that, a lot of these Bitcoin treasury companies, right, and stuff like that, not that I care about them, but I'm just saying they obviously, most of their stuff is being held with, Coinbase. Like if you ask me, and I know you guys came from Coinbase, we had that discussion, but still it's totally a third party. And in my eyes, I just don't see it as secure as we've learned from history, right? That the custodian is a major point of failure. So what are your thoughts on, are you, would you say that the solution you have right now would be good for a business as well? Or would you make some tweaks to try to maybe cover, I don't know, like.
I think the product now would absolutely serve for enterprise customers. There's probably tweaks and some more conversation and user research we'd want to do specifically towards that. But I would agree, and it's really important to understand that 6102 attack, it's not a black swan event, it's a white swan event. Like this is gonna happen. And if you're a business that's custodying Bitcoin for other individuals, or even just for your own Bitcoin treasury, you need to take the possibility of a 6102 attack seriously, and you can't put it at a 0% chance, because that's exactly what happened to people in 1933 when the largest transfer of wealth that ever happened in human history occurred. And that's when the largest criminal organization on the planet, also known as the government, decided that they could steal your property and give you what they called property, i.e. fiat money, in exchange for it. Within a year, that property lost more than 60% of its value. And I believe very strongly that's going to happen again. And if you're a treasury company or anybody else that's using Bitcoin in any meaningful way, you have to take that very seriously, and you have to prepare for that, because it's going to be a one-time event. And if you're caught in that, very similar to you being caught in an earthquake without reinforcing your house, you're going to be dead.
Damn. Yeah. It's a very good point. And I like the way that you framed it, right? That it's not a black swan event. It's a white swan event. And I think that it's very important, right? Is that, it's only a black swan event right? I always give the turkey analogy, right? It's only the turkey that's not aware of Thanksgiving, right? Everybody else in the like that's in the space is fully aware of Thanksgiving, right? Except for the turkey. So again, this kind of goes along, along those lines, with the 6102. I don't know when we're actually going to see it though. And I'll tell you what throws me off about that is the fact that right now we have a lot of governments, putting it in quotations, right? Government support for Bitcoin, right? So, or perceived government support, right? Everybody, I'm hearing the nice things, but there's not really much actually going on there. But anyways,
I'd say administrative support as opposed to government
yeah,
support.
thank you.
I believe there will be a backlash at some point in time. And I think a lot of people that have made the decision to cozy up to this administration and bribe them for what they want will actually find themselves charged with criminal proceeds at some point in time. And I think that could very well precipitate a 6102 event because at this point, I can't imagine a Democratic administration coming in and being like, we love Bitcoin too. Like, I have a feeling it'll probably be the opposite. I hope not, but I think these are really important factors that people should consider and understand that, like, it turns out that the apparatus in the 20th century that murdered most people in human history, i.e. the government, like, it's not actually your friend. And if you believe it is your friend, you should really read some more history.
And the beauty of, our 6102 defense is we're returning to these sacred principles of human rights, the Fifth Amendment, due process, and the roots of our law and the principles of the Constitution of the founding fathers. So this is not about doing anything that is illegal. This is about bringing the law back to itself. That in fact, the government activity that we've seen is extra legal, extrajudicial, emergency powers, mass surveillance, the Patriot Act. The government has departed from the law. The government has departed from the Constitution. And so by situating the 6102 defense within the fundamental basis of law, which is not something that we can do with gold, because with gold to resist 6102, you have to resist that person physically taking that brick out of your hand. And there's a limited ability to do that. But since the essence of Bitcoin security is information that is fundamentally about a thought crime or about being forced to speak against your will or being prohibited from doing mathematics, these are all things that are protected by the Constitution, protected by the roots of the law. So we have tremendous amount of legal and political legitimacy that we are rooting in for this protection so that we can actually win this battle, because we do not intend to end up like Samurai Wallet or other companies where you're just going to end up in jail or get shut down, and that's not going to work. And also in the process, we're going to elevate the political system. We're going to bring it back to itself and undo the injustice that has occurred by being more firmly rooted in the roots of our country, in the roots of the legal system, than the current government is itself.
Privacy and individual freedom at the base layer.
Exactly.
This is what I'm hearing from you guys. I really appreciate it. We're going to wrap up. But before we do, just like you guys to let people know, right, where they can find you, what's the easiest way to get in touch with Jesse and Erik if they have more questions about VORA.
Yeah, so we have our website, VORA.io. Erik and I are on X. Jesse Posner, I think you're Erik Cason on X. You can find on our website, we have an email address, or our individual email addresses are jesse@vora.io or erik@vora.io. We also have a PGP key, so if you want to use encrypted communication, and we have our NPub on the website as well. So these are all great ways to get in touch with us.
Fantastic. We are going to be putting that in the show notes, guys. This is gonna wrap up this awesome chat here with Jesse and Erik from VORA. Any final thoughts from you guys before we say goodbye?
Just thanks for the time and bringing attention to the issue, because at the end of the day, we think that really escalating self-custody to the next level of sovereign custody is the most important thing in Bitcoin today, and keeping this ethos alive is important. So thanks for the time, and we greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I thank you guys. Honestly, you're two of my favorite characters in the space, and I just, you know what I mean? Like when I listen to you both, either of you, even in individual circumstances, I'm always learning something, and oftentimes I come away with it with like, you know what, these guys give me hope. Guys give me hope. So I appreciate it. I appreciate it, guys. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next week. Peace.